and welcome back to Cooking the Books with me, Gilly Smith, the podcast which takes us through 4 food moments from the books of our favourite food writers. It's about all of life through the prism of food. And this week I'm talking about what home means to Irish TV chef Donal Skehan.
And my wife ringing me and saying, look, I can't get him to sleep. I don't know what to do. He might respond to your voice. And I was singing down the phone in the corner of a cookery demonstration, row, row, row your boat, and going, this is absolute madness. This is not right.
Donal has moved a lot in his massive career on TV, from Eurovision to Saturday Kitchen and onto Food Network in LA. And I've met him a few times along the way. Now, with wife Sofie and their 2 young boys, he's come home to Ireland. His 11th cookbook, Home Kitchen, is a meditation on home, nostalgia, and who he is now as a food writer. It's about arriving where he started and finding his place for the first time. But before we get our feet under his latest dining room table, he showed me around his sound studio, via Zoom of course.
Well, my setup is a requirement because now we have to do all these pieces of content where I do little voiceovers, and then for the TV show I do voiceovers. And rather than having to leave my home to go and do it, I set up this very inexpensive, it's all smoke and mirrors because these are just 2 soundboards, a little microphone setup, and I'm at my office desk. But it does mean that you don't have to leave. You could just do it all from here.
It's extraordinary. And we were just saying before we started recording that the last time we saw each other, we were in my friend Audrey Gillen's flat in Shoreditch. We turned up. You were supposed to be cooking me something. It was for the Delicious podcast, I think. And your publisher had forgotten to tell you that to bring any of the ingredients. But the point was that I'd got on a train. Were you over from LA, or were you just about to go to LA?
I was, and I laughed because that was the whole thing, was that I was very excited to do the podcast, but I was very confused as to the location you chose and why we were going to some random person's apartment to their kitchen. And then it all made sense when we didn't have any of the ingredients. And I think, what did we do? We kind of mocked through it, basically.
Well, we did. But you and I kind of do everything from our homes now. This is post-lockdown life. You have moved your entire family to Ireland. Just fill us in for the last, 3 years. It's been huge for you, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually been, I think we're still getting over it because it's been quite a journey from Los Angeles to home. And I think we initially had planned to come back from LA for maybe a kind of a 6-month period, see how it worked out. But that kind of escalated quite quickly when COVID hit in 2020, and we had our second born was only 3 or 4 months old, and we decided it was now or never, and we were going to go back home and we were going to see how life unfolded in that way. And so we moved home without a massive plan, and because of that we ended up in 3 different rental properties. We moved 3 times in 3 years, or 4 times in 3 years, so it was quite all over the place. And as of this year we've bought our first home, and I mean that's our first home. In all of what I've done, I've always been searching for that home kitchen and for that element of groundedness that I think I didn't realise I was missing for so long, and we always kind of went with what was the next exciting step. But actually I think in the long run we were looking for that grounding space, and eventually we found it, but not without trials and tribulations along the way.
And that's what the book is about. I mean, it's called Home Kitchen. It could just be called Home. The whole story is about nostalgia. It's about family. It's about place. It's about finding your place. And it's about food memories, isn't it? It's very rich. It's very deep. I love the inside spread. I do a lot of writing retreats now, and we have lots of WhatsApp groups for all the people who've been on the writing retreats here. And I sent them that inside spread, which is the typewriter, and your granny's recipes all written out in her handwriting. It's rich, isn't it? People loved it. They were like, oh my God, I want that in my book.
Yeah.
It's very different from the mad, multicultural, fabulous LA life, which we'll talk about a little bit here, but it's very rooted, isn't it?
Well, I think that was key to kind of writing this book, was kind of understanding where we've come from, where we've got to. And I mean, at the start of all my cooking and my recipes, my grandmother obviously kind of looms large. She was an amazing home cook, and she never worked in a professional kitchen or anything, but in the 1970s she was baking, croissants and doing fabulous things and doing high-end French cuisine. They were both sculptors, my granny and grandfather, and they were both very artistic, and because of that they ran a gallery out of their home and my granny would end up having to kind of entertain these very interesting types, and because of that she would have to kind of create these menus. And the legacy she's left us are these beautiful handwritten notebooks, kitchen notebooks that are written in this calligraphy Osmeroid pen style. And she has, even in that opening spread, she kind of has little terms of things that she would have read about and described, and things that she would come back to time and time again, like her plum pudding. These beautiful tarts that she would have had as the desserts as the centerpiece, the show-stopping element of a lovely meal. And I think more than anything, there's lovely little notes that she's written about, and like we would do ourselves if you're having people over, like, what do I need to have prepped out? What do I need to have? She has like stoke the Rayburn stove at like 11 a.m. So, I mean, those are the little elements that kind of have woven through to kind of where we're at today. And, I think in finding home, in wanting to find that, looking back at her recipes and understanding that was such a big part of it, was an absolutely wonderful starting point. So, I mean, yeah, it's been a journey, and I think as much as there is those sort of multicultural recipes in there, for me, the biggest part of this book in essence is that element of sitting together at a table and enjoying food with friends and family. And I know that sounds cliche, but it is something that has become so much more important over the years.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, very, very, very often, particularly on this programme, these stories of finding home only really come from leaving it. You have to go away to understand what you're missing. And it's that yearning, isn't it? There's something in your soul, in your heart, that drives you to find what you're looking for. Tell us about leaving Ireland. You'd been in a boy band when we first met, way back. It feels like a very long time ago. We talked about you being on Eurovision and, and being a very different character. You went to LA to be on Food Network.
Yes, yeah. That's essentially what brought us to LA. And, I think it's interesting because a lot of people talk about LA and have preconceived notions of what it is. And I think even us, when we kind of went over the first time, you're taken by the sunshine, the green juices, the beautiful starlets and all that kind of nonsense that goes with it. But as time progressed and as we kind of spent more time out there, we realised it's such an incredible city. And even as a food city, I feel like from Ireland and the UK, I feel it's still undiscovered. You really kind of understand it much more when you actually live there rather than visit, because everyone ends up in Santa Monica and Venice. And actually the amazing thing about Los Angeles is that it is made up of these fantastic little neighbourhoods. And we found ourselves, purely because of the cost of living there, we found ourselves in East LA, which, is not where most of the people are taking meetings and doing all the celebrity sort of stuff. We found ourselves in East LA, and really more than anything, we found ourselves in this fantastic neighbourhood. We were in Eagle Rock, which gave us kind of a stepping stone to Echo Park, Silver Lake, Highland Park, Pasadena, into the San Gabriel Valley. And the San Gabriel Valley is an incredible spot which has the largest population of Asian people outside of Asia, and it's incredible. You can get specific, Sichuan restaurants. You can get Vietnamese, really specific representations of different cuisines. So that's what made me fall in love with it. And it wasn't the green juices, the kale, and the yoga, even though I did a little bit of that. But the amazing thing is, you get drawn out by something like I had a Food Network contract. And, the amazing thing is those last only so long. And, we did one show and I was literally doing this incredible show, Food Network Star Kids. It was like the spin-off show from Bobby Flay and Giada De Laurentiis. In the first 4 months of being in Los Angeles, I was on a panel with Bobby Flay and Giada De Laurentiis, who are like the king and queen of American, Food Network. And I was like, oh my God. Do you know what the funniest thing was? I ended up on that first episode and they all had a suit for 2 occasions on the one show. I had one outfit. So I ended up like the absolute poor fella down the end, the Irish fella down the end, in my same outfit. I wasn't even wearing a suit. And so I didn't realise quick off the mark that this was the standard I needed to keep out there. But yeah, we did that show, and I think it ran for like 8 episodes, a year or two. And then that was the end of that. And then you kind of have to realise that, yes, you have to keep going out there. And by that stage, we had moved out and we had, we'd taken on a house, and so there was an element of like, we have to make it work out here. So there was that sense of finding life and finding friends and finding, you know, a village out there, and we did that in Eagle Rock, and it was a great spot for it. But also there was a huge surge of online content at that time, so YouTube was what brought us out, you know, and kept us out there. So that online food space was always part of why we were in Los Angeles, and because of that we really did enjoy it.
But the family at home was kind of calling. I mean, your grandfather was ill, and it was his death that made you finally leave LA. Was it also your second born? Was that kind of that feeling? What was drawing you back before your grandfather died?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, my schedule was so ridiculous that I was back and forth to the UK and Ireland probably about once a month. So I was doing Saturday Kitchen. It was at the time before Matt Tebbett took over completely, and we were in that kind of weird space of, is he going to get it? Am I going to get it? Is someone else going to get it? And so basically we were all auditioning every week we were on it to see who was going to get Saturday Kitchen after James Martin had left, and ultimately the fabulous Matt got it. But there was question marks at the time, and so I wasn't letting it, you know, go. So I was travelling over and back for that, and we have a production company that makes my shows and other chefs' shows here in Ireland as well. So there was a lot going on, and I was over to manage that. So that was causing a lot of issues. And I do remember there was one moment where my show had been sold to BBC Asia, and I was in Singapore, and we were doing this mad press trip where I was travelling across, I think it was like 5 or 6 different Asian countries. And I remember being in Singapore hosting a cookery demonstration, and my wife, he must have only been in like 8 or 9 months, ringing me and saying, look, I can't get him to sleep. I don't know what to do. He might respond to your voice. And I was singing down the phone in the corner of a cookery demonstration, row, row, row your boat, and going, this is absolute madness. This is not right. And so by the time Oliver, our second born, arrived, we kind of had in the back of our head that we needed to find more balance in life, and LA wasn't providing that. And, you know, as much as there was opportunities and, you know, career possibilities there, we could not manage it to a place that was sustainable for us. And at the time, I think you're right, like the catalyst at the time was that moment where my grandfather passed away in January of 2020, and I couldn't make it back. Oliver was only a couple of months old, he wasn't even a month and a half old. And I couldn't travel back. And I remember watching the funeral online, which is just the most crushing thing when you see your entire family being there and you know, being part of it. And I just remember kind of going, this isn't it's not working anymore. And that was really a moment. And at the time, you know, the funniest thing with my granddad, every time I'd visit him, he could not understand why we'd moved to LA. And his mantra was, are you ever going to move back to Howth? Are you ever going to come back to Howth? When are you coming back to Howth? And so I think he would be incredibly proud that we have managed to come back if he was still here. And I think, it's been a big part of the reason why. So, yeah. And now that we're here 3 years, and I feel we've ultimately made the very best move. It's been so lovely to kind of find, even to where we're at today. We have our own house. We've chickens are on the way next week, Gilly. There's chickens, you know. So we've committed to life for all the kind of years of wandering. I feel like we've committed, and Ireland and Dublin is a fantastic place. I'm over to London still quite a bit, but like at this stage, it's like getting on the bus. Whereas before, it felt like an absolute mammoth task to get back and get home and to manage things. So yeah, it's great to be back, and it's great to be home.
Let's go into some of the real food memories that make up those recipes. The first food moment is your granny's lamb shoulder. It's one of your earliest memories of your granny's cooking. Tell us about this one.
Well, it's an interesting one, because while I do mention my grandmother quite a bit throughout my books and throughout everything I do, and the interesting thing about her is that we didn't actually eat or cook with her that much, because she was quite subdued in how she kind of was a grandmother. And so a visit to my grandmother's house was quite a prim and proper experience. And, you know, we always laughed because it was like going up for an interview. So you wouldn't have seen them for maybe 2 weeks, and you'd go up on the Sunday, and it would be after Mass, and then it would be before the Sunday dinner. So it was that kind of, that sweet spot where they had space to see you and interview you and basically ask how your week was. And so you'd have to come up with the answers. And I remember very well at one point being a little bit older and swearing in front of them by accident. Like I was excitedly telling a story, and my goodness, like you could hear a pin drop, and I obviously had to play it off and keep going. But they were quite prim and proper, and always up for a laugh, always great storytellers. But we would never really sit down to dinner with them. And so what I would be as a child would be tantalised by the incredible smells from my grandmother's kitchen, and it almost felt like this kind of I suppose untenable thing that she did, and it became even more kind of exciting and like undiscovered. And so I would always be sneaking into the kitchen, seeing what she was doing. If she had to check on something in the oven, I would always go in with her and see what she was making. And the lamb I suppose her lamb shoulder or her lamb leg, whatever she was doing on the day was the classic, because the smell in the kitchen when you would arrive there on a Sunday was incredible. She would often do a lamb shoulder because it was smaller, and when she was cooking for my granddad and her, it would be a smaller meal. But that smell is what I associate so instantly with her cooking, and that smell of lamb, garlic, rosemary, potatoes, boulangère in the oven, it was just so fabulous. And I do remember, I think I was 8 or 9 at the time, following her into the kitchen, and her taking some slivers off the lamb, packing it into this tinfoil package, and then just putting it under my arm basically and sending me away in the car with it. And I remember my mum didn't even realise it had happened. And when we got into the car, I was eating beautiful steaming hot roast lamb that was dipped in salt in the back seat of the car, and she was like, where did you get that, and how did you manage to kind of get that from her? But I mean, for all the lack of kind of the meals we would have had it with her, our conversation was always around food. And she was an amazing cookbook collector, like so many food lovers are. And she had beautiful Elizabeth David cookbooks. She had these interests, and I laugh because when I went through her cookbook collection at one point, the most strange one she had was a WWE cookbook, a worldwide wrestling championship cookbook. So she was an eclectic collector of cookbooks. So she had Elizabeth David to her wrestling cookbooks, but she covered it all. But she was, she never ceased to be interested. And I do remember one of the last meals I cooked for her, because I used to kind of towards the end of her life, I used to drop her up kind of cakes and things like that. And one of the last meals she asked me to cook for her was a sweet and sour chicken, because she had such a fascination with Asian cuisine. And she actually gave me this beautiful encyclopedia of Asian cookery when I was about 12. And I remember that opened a world that I was fascinated by. And I love that memory that was the last meal that I cooked for her. And I've never cooked the best sweet and sour chicken in my life as the one I cooked for her that day.
Amazing.
Whether she ate it or not, I'll never know. But yeah, it was a core memory.
And I suppose you would have had lots of conversations with her then about the Asian influences that you picked up.
I mean, we had moved. She passed away in 2015, just before myself and Sofie got married. But she was always fascinated by my travels. And, at that stage, I was doing quite a lot of travel, and I had been to Vietnam. We had done Thailand, and I had just finished a series in Europe, all around Europe. But I remember that, I would bring her the cookbooks that were inspiring me at the time. And there's a fantastic Vietnamese-Australian food writer called Luc Nguyen, and I love his cookbooks, and he has some really beautiful ones. And I remember leaving this I think it's called Indochine, and it was just a wonderful cookbook. And so we would often bond about those, and towards the end where I was travelling quite a bit, she would be fascinated by these things, and so I'd be able to come back with these interesting stories and ingredients. And I think it was what we bonded over, for sure.
Amazing. And in fact, your second food moment is very similar. I mean, it's a back to school slow cooker chicken stew. I mean, I'm sure your granny would have been thrilled with this one. It feels very much like a weeknight, slow, gorgeous cook, this one. I mean, I love what you do with your weekend cooking, but actually it's these midweek meals that I kind of go to your books for. Tell us about this one.
Well, I suppose that's kind of what I've become known for over the years. I think, the important stage of any food writer's career is understanding who you write for. And I think in the last couple of years, that has been something that has really, that I've helped myself define, in the sense that I know who I'm writing for. I think in the early stages, I was kind of writing the recipes that inspired me, but ultimately you serve a purpose in some ways about becoming a food writer. And I think, the recipes that, like you said, the ones that you dip into are the ones that solve a problem. It is like you're standing in front of the pantry door and going, what am I going to make tonight? And so having a solution for those is as key to me as it is to my readers. And, the chicken stew you mentioned is probably one of the most popular ones, because it just is that instant comfort with very little effort, very simple ingredients. You're talking chicken thighs, celery, onion, garlic, maybe a carrot, and a good chicken stock. And then you make these homemade dumplings. It's probably the cornerstones of really good home cooking skills. And, it's very simple, but it ultimately results in a chicken stew that, what I like to think, it tastes like a good Sunday roast. It's got all the elements, the chicken fat, the juices, the thyme, all the elements. And then on top of that, these really stodgy, beautiful, comforting dumplings. Now you can make it, I feel like I have to veer into the air fryer and slow cooker world, but ultimately all of my recipes can be made in what I like to do, which is like a really good casserole, and one that has that patina of, grease and a little bit of dirt that adds to the flavour. I tell you, my grandmother would have been very, very adamant about that being an absolute core element of a really good home cooked recipe, is that patina is there. But I think, that's why those are the recipes we come back to. It is at the core of why we cook. It is nostalgia. It is that element of kind of understanding and wanting that moment of settling down and easing into that moment where the windows are steamed up, where you've put a little bit of love and effort. And even with our two boys, they're literally just kind of starting that school journey, and I know these are going to be moments that they will come back to. These are the recipes that they will come back to. And even in writing this recipe book, I think as time has moved on, I want these books to be, as every food writer says, they want them to be dog-eared and splattered and to be used over and over. And in the long run, I mean, this is the 11th cookbook I've written, but, I know at the core of them, there are those recipes that people come back to time and time again. And I think in every book, there is always the effort to try and find those recipes that are going to be sustainable in terms of people coming back to time and time again. So that is why that recipe tends to be one that I dive back to as often as I possibly can.
But the third food moment is a sort of an elevation of that. I did this weekend, the rosemary and thyme confit chicken with 20 garlic cloves. It's pretty similar, isn't it? It's the 20 garlic cloves, slightly different to Nigella's, slightly different to Delia's. Why 20?
Well, I do mention this in the introduction because, every food writer seems to have their own version of the 30 cloves, the 20 cloves, the 10 cloves. And realistically, it's about your own take. How many cloves do you feel like peeling on the day? Are they going to make them that major difference? Not really, but they are going to infuse the chicken with all the flavour. Now, my take on it, and this, I suppose the different point, is that it is slowly confit in this olive oil. And so by adding as much garlic as you can possibly peel, you end up, but bar the beautiful tender chicken that you get from it, you end up with this golden liquor that basically can transform anything into something incredible. It's basically like having kind of, your own personal tin of duck fat that you can use for roast potatoes, roast vegetables. And so I actually make that recipe specifically so that I get the oil, and I use the oil for months afterwards. It keeps in a jar, and you get, like I said, you've got chicken fat, you've got rosemary, you've got garlic, and it's all infused in this beautiful olive oil that is just transformed. So keep that in a pot, and you can do it over the Hasselback potatoes, which I've suggested in that recipe. But ultimately, beautiful tender chicken.
I did it with roasted potatoes yesterday.
Did you?
For the two of us, and used the entire pot. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. And that's the thing, is that, like, again, going back to my granny, the thing I was left with from her is that level of confidence. And that's a perfect recipe for, your own additions. You take that baseline recipe, you get tender chicken, you get your oil, but you can add, lemon peel, you could add sage, you could use whatever, garlic peel. You can take that oil and transform it into anything else. You could take the chicken, shred it, and make it into a salad. That is, for me, what a good home cook is about. It's about taking the core of a recipe and being able to transport it in many different ways. And so while I like to provide a recipe, I find it very hard to follow my own recipes because I am always, tweaking or planning or doing something else with it. And I think, the root of a good home kitchen is one that, relies on recipes like this that will take it in different directions. So I am glad that we chose this one because it is a good example of, core home cooking recipes and ones that you can, basically kind of take in any other direction you fancy.
Absolutely. And, if you are doing a chicken, those two together teach you pretty much everything you need to know about flavouring a chicken. Your fourth is pork shoulder. And again, I think that once you've kind of really sort of mastered how to do a slow roasted pork and the kind of flavours that go with it, it's so different in many ways to what you do with a chicken. You can kind of do anything. Is that why you chose it, or is it because it's all local, seasonal ingredients of home?
I think the reason I chose this recipe to discuss was primarily because it was such a big moment for us moving back from Los Angeles, where it is kind of harder to track down high quality ingredients, where you really have to go to an effort to, and then pay out the ear. Like if you're not going to your farmer's market, if you're not going to Whole Foods, it's very hard to kind of track your seasonal local side of things in Los Angeles. When we came home, I suppose I had, for 5-6 years while we had travelled, I poo-pooed Irish food and kind of just been, not even poo-pooed, but certainly kind of just distanced myself because I was distracted by other things. And we came home in the heart of COVID-19. We came home and the only place that was local to me was 5 doors down, and we was this kind of the lifeblood to my cooking when we moved back to this very old house, this old Victorian house with a big old agate. It was like stepping back into the dark ages, technically, from having had this, diverse, really interesting food ethos in Los Angeles to back to, meat and to veg in Ireland. And, we have this incredible butcher very close to us called Higgins Butchers, and Rick there has such a passion for creating, and choosing and selecting really beautiful meat. And, the first meal that we cooked out of that aga, which was temperamental, I hate that aga, my God, I have terrible memories. But it really was, a step back into that world. And he really produces this beautiful pork, the selection of pork. And I got pork shoulder, I got garlic scapes from a producer called Drummond House in Ireland. We actually had them for our wedding. My fabulous friend Jenny Glasgow, she did the food for our wedding, and she had made this beautiful platter of garlic scapes with grilled meat and stuff like that for our wedding. And I wanted to kind of create an element of that, but I also had this beautiful pork shoulder, and it was the first thing I cooked, family and friends, in this old Victorian house out of an old aga. And it was that real sense of we were home, and we had such a love for the food that we were, that was local and seasonal. And McNally's, this Irish farm in North County Dublin, they all organic produce. So I had this celebration meal of really great Irish pork, beautiful garlic scapes and salads and organic vegetables. And it was just like, oh, we've missed this. We didn't realise how much we had missed it. And for me, it was that journey back into that kind of, I suppose, that UK and Irish way, and our approach to seasonal eating and looking at the food that we're eating and understanding where it comes from. So from that perspective, I think that's probably the core reason. It's these sorts of recipes that are the cornerstone of a week's cooking. And while you might make the pork shoulder roast with the crackling and the tender meat during a Sunday feast, you have the leftovers. You have those elements that kind of feed into the week and can be transformed into a number of different things. So I think for me, that's a core memory of coming home, and a core memory of that sort of respect for those sorts of homegrown ingredients that really do shape our week.
It's interesting because, all of that picture you just painted is all about nostalgia, isn't it? It's, from the aga to the slow roast to the Irish ingredients. When you were leaving for LA and that kind of massive sort of cornucopia of wonderful world ingredients, I wonder, did you see British food in the same way as you do now?
I think I have always been distracted by foreign cuisine, and I have always been fascinated and intrigued and excited by foreign cuisine. And I think as I've got a little bit older, there is that sense of kind of nostalgia that comes back towards exactly what we've just spoken about. I mean, you look at the recipes we've discussed, they're very hearty, they're humbling, and, you know, they are the sorts of recipes that I certainly would have grown up with. I mean, I will always have this massive interest in the different cuisines around the world. But I do think, you know, it's an interesting time, even in Irish food at the moment, where you have people who have travelled and chefs that have travelled and come back with these techniques and ingredients. And, you know, there's some fantastic restaurants even in Dublin here and around the country where you have people who've, you know, transformed elements of seasonal produce and brought them to the fore using kind of techniques that have come. What I would say is that now more than ever, I think, you know, I'm writing for an audience who are in essence, you know, homebodies, who are people who have that sense of nostalgia, who when they want to cook, they want really great results. And so on one side, I have, you know, very accessible, simple things like, you know, spicy popcorn chicken and fried rice and things like that. But on the other side of it, we have those classics, you know, those classics that are the cornerstones of any Irish and sort of UK home cooks. So I think it's about a balance, and it's about, you know, there's a great quote in which is not his, but Jeremy Lee's cookbook, and it's a T.S. Eliot quote about we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And I wish I had written that in my cookbook, because it just, I feel in lots of ways for many home cooks, it's one of those things that it's that element of exploration that really does allow us to see ourselves in more truly. And I think that for me is what has happened in the last 5 or 7 years, and has essentially helped me write a book that is very representative of where I am at and where I'm confidently at as a food writer. And I think I hope more than anything it is that reason it will become a companion for many people, because those are the sorts of recipes we rely on that keep us going throughout the week, throughout the weekends, throughout the year. You know, food is and will always be that element of something that sees us through the dark days and the light days, you know.
Thanks for listening. Do rate and review the podcast if you like it on Apple Podcasts, and then head to my Substack to see and to hear Donal read his Granny Betty's original apple strudel recipe.